Hello, and welcome to Farming Flowers, the podcast where we dig into life all around the flower field. We're chatting with growers, soil nerds, designers, and all kinds of folks who love local flowers. Whether you're growing commercially or just dreaming of blooms, you're in the right place. I'm Lisa, and I am super glad you're here.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Farming Flowers. Today, I am so excited to introduce James Seeley, who's the agronomist with Lazarus Naturals, and he is going to be answering all of my very deep questions about soil and soil health. So, thank you for being here with us today, James.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited. It'll be fun.
Okay, so what I thought we'd do is kind of just dive into, or dig in, I should say, into some questions on soil health. So I've got three kind of basic areas that we're going to talk about. The first one is going to be understanding what makes soil healthy. So my first question would be, what are the key indicators of healthy soil, and how can farmers assess their own soil health? And I know you and I have talked about soil testing, and we'll have a short little video that we're going to post, I think, on our YouTube video at some point, or on our YouTube channel about James showed me how we should be doing soil testing. And so I don't know if that's an indicator of what people need to be doing to address their soil health. Is that jumping into doing a test? Is that the first place?
That's where I would start always. I mean, it's hard to know just by looking at the dirt. There are visual differences just in, what the saturation point, what the water holding capacity is, the color of the dirt even. But yeah, the big thing is starting with the soil test. That'll give you a baseline of what's actually there. And when I'm looking at soil tests, the first thing I look at is the organic matter content, the pH, and then the cation exchange capacity. So the CEC is typically how it's listed. And
Okay.
higher CEC, higher organic matter, they kind of go hand in hand just because organic matter does increase your nutrient holding capacity. And ideally you're in that at least 15 and above range on your organic matter, or sorry, your CEC, organic matter at least 3 to 4%. And so
Okay.
organic matter, plant residue, it's manure, it's any organic material really that you're adding to your soil year after year. And that slowly breaks down through microbes in the soil that convert that organic matter to now plant available nitrogen. That
Okay.
CEC number, that's all your cations that are in the soil. So it's your potassium, it's your calcium, it's your magnesium. Sulfur plays a role in there as well. Sodium plays a role in there. Higher CEC just means better nutrient holding, more exchange sites in the soil for those different ions to bond to. And
Oh,
so
okay.
building that over time is really hard, and it is very dependent on your soil texture. Clay tends to have really small pores and allows for a lot of uh, areas for nutrients to bond to, whereas what we have here in Central Oregon, a lot of that more sandy loam soil, a lot more coarse, just less exchange sites. Nutrients tend to leach right out of it, either into groundwater or surface runoff or wind erosion, as it gets very windy here in the spring.
Yeah, true. Okay, so somebody that maybe has more clay soil, their soil test is going to look probably really different than someone who has, like, we have mostly sandy soil here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we see that just from our field here in Powell Butte. That's our home place versus a field that's a mile away. And you can do a particle size analysis as part of your soil testing as well. And that'll give you an idea of what kind of soil texture you do have. It'll give you the percent of sand, silt, and clay. And so there's not really an ideal mix. It's just is what it is from years and
Yeah,
years of wind
yeah.
erosion and whatever else.
Okay, so it sounds like soil test is a place to start, and I think you have a couple of recommendations for labs. I'll put those in the show notes for this. So if anybody wants to go there and get soil testing done, what is your opinion on some of those soil tests that, the little containers, you can buy them online or you can sometimes buy them at garden centers. Is that even worth someone trying one of those little tests at home if they don't want to go all out for a big test at this point?
Yeah, I've never personally used them. I would suspect that their sensitivity range is kind of variable,
Mm,
and
okay.
I don't know even how they work. If it's like, when you're taking a
Yeah.
pH test and it's a color, and it's like, well, I'm more or less colorblind, so for me to read that, it's really
Yeah.
difficult. Versus somebody
Right.
else might not have a problem with it. And again, like those tests are maybe $10. You're spending $50 for
Hmm.
a lab to do the analysis for you. And I just feel better about it in the long run. It's an investment in long term
Yeah.
soil health. And so, spending that extra
Um,
money goes a long way.
yeah. Okay. So as long as we're on the soil test subject, what is your recommendation on what time of year people should be doing soil testing, and should they do it every year? And I guess that probably depends on what their particular situation is, but what's your overall recommendation?
Yeah. The main thing is just to do it at the same time every year. So whether you do it in the
Okay.
fall or the spring, you just want to be really consistent so you can see that change
Okay.
over time. Um,
Okay.
we are going to start on our farm doing it twice annually, one pre-plant in the spring and then one mid-season just to see where we're at. We won't need to do
Oh,
that forever. Once
okay.
we dial in a fertility program, we'll kind of have an idea, and then
Mhm.
we can go to every year, and then maybe every 5 years, because it does change really slow. You're not going to necessarily see that change year after year, but you know,
Okay.
just seeing what is the actual crop removing from the field every year is a huge indicator of what
Mhm.
you need to be adding to the field. Uh,
Okay.
and
Okay.
then
So it sounds like if you can get it, I was just going to say you could get it at some point where you don't have to test every year if you're managing your nutrients.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's, depending on what you're growing, there is so much research out there of what is the plant consuming. So you can avoid some steps there, but it is so dependent on, all those micro factors like the summer or the season you had, climate wise, or, you know, different vendors of fertilizers or, small
Oh,
nutrient
okay.
analysis differences. Um,
Okay.
and then, yeah, whether or not you're tilling every year or you're going no-till or leaving a year fallow or uh,
Mhm.
rotating crops even or cover cropping, all of that plays a huge role in that long-term soil health.
Okay. Okay, so then the next question that I want to talk about, because I see this all over the place, is like microbes that you can buy now. So I know they play a pretty important role in soil health. And so, are there things that farmers can do other than just going and buying microbes online and having them shipped to you? Are there things farmers can do that will encourage maybe beneficial microbes to take hold in their soil, or do you need to start with buying, you know, those little packages of microbes?
There's definitely different amendments you can do to the soil, but a huge factor is really just rotating what you're planting. If
Okay.
you plant the same crop year after year, not only are you likely to develop diseases in the soil, but you're not really increasing the biodiversity of the microbes
Mm,
present. And there's something like a billion microbes in a pinch of soil. It's an insane number. And so there is, it is all of your soil does come down to the microbes in it. Um,
okay.
it plays a bigger role if you're wanting to purchase anything um, to inoculate cover crops. So any nitrogen fixing legume, they will have a specific uh, inoculant that you would want to put on your seed to help those root nodules actually convert the nitrogen in the air and fix it into the soil. Uh, if those aren't
Okay.
present in your soil, you might be planting a cover crop hoping to get some like clover or peas or something, and hoping to get some
Hmm.
nitrogen fixing. But if that microbe's not present, it's not going to happen.
Oh, okay. So I guess you could be wasting money on something. I mean, if you don't know what you need and what you have, you could just be throwing money away, putting things
Yeah,
down that
exactly.
may or may not even be okay. Okay, good to know. Okay, and you did ask this, or you did mention this earlier on the soil organic matter, and do you have any tips for how we can build our organic matter in our soil over time? I mean, I'm guessing it's not something that happens immediately because it does need to be broken down by these microbes and all the things that are in the soil. So, what are some easy things that people can do to help build that organic matter over time?
Yeah. I mean, cover cropping is always great, but a big thing is
Okay.
just to minimize your tillage as much as possible. So
Okay.
by tilling, you're increasing the compost, basically the of that crop matter, and so instead of converting it into organic matter that will break down over time, it's just breaking down a lot faster, and then it's either leaching out through the soil or eroding in some other fashion. Um, that is definitely the biggest part, and then always keeping a crop on the ground for sure is very important in building that long-term health, or building up your organic matter in the soil. Manure,
Okay.
natural amendments like that are also really helpful. Mulching is definitely very
Okay.
popular.
Is that like should you maybe think about adding manure once a year, or is there any sort of a like a recipe for what you should kind of aim for as far as building your organic matter?
It is pretty heavily dependent on what kind of soil composition you do have. So
Okay.
again, like with sand, you're just not going to build it as quickly as you would with clay. Clay does tend to have a lot more organic
Yeah.
matter in it than a sand or silt soil would, um, and so finding out what your soil is that is for sure a first step. That'll give you an idea.
Okay.
We do add manure to all of our organic fields, but then we also till every year, and we try to minimize the intensity of it. The deep tillage is really what speeds up that breakdown, but even light tillage it contributes. And so um, our big goal is, keeping our ground covered with cover crops throughout the winter. That means getting them in early fall because we do have a short season
Mhm.
here in Central Oregon, and if you
Yeah.
plant in November, it's not really coming up until April of the following year.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is for sure the hardest thing to do is building organic matter over time. Um, I have a note. I didn't write it down. I should have. It is something like 10,000 pounds of matter to increase your organic matter by 0.1%. Uh, so it is,
Wow.
and it's a substantial amount, and so it does build very slowly. Um, and again, there's a variety of factors, environmental and otherwise, but it's a hard thing to do for
Wow.
sure.
Okay. So I mean, I guess having the reduced till or no till, that I mean, and we hear a lot about that in the news now. People really are kind of hopping on that bandwagon. I know a lot of farmers have done that for many, many years and gotten away from the deep chisel plowing and just tearing things up. So it sounds like no till probably is a way that can help build organic matter long term. And
It's a way
then
to, yeah,
just
it's a way to build organic matter. It's a way to build your microbial structure in the soil.
okay.
A huge reason that farmers do like to till is they get those compaction zones, and you're trying to break that up so you can get oxygen into
Mhm.
your soil. Because
Mhm.
without
Yep.
oxygen, your microbes die anyway. Um, and so now we are finding there are plenty of cover crops available, like tillage radish, where it's just a really deep shooting white radish, daikon radish,
Mhm.
that will help
Mhm.
break up that soil. That's also a big part of the regenerative ag movement of incorporating
Yeah.
livestock into your fields because they do a great job of rooting and breaking up those
Yeah.
compaction zones.
So that probably then, by doing cover crops, and then I guess when those die down, and then you're mulching and all that, that probably makes a big difference in like holding on to soil moisture as well. So if you're
Yeah.
not letting, I guess, the wind erosion and just the sun bake your soil, I guess that probably really helps keeping the moisture in.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you know, when you till, you lose all soil structure. So all those pores that had been created throughout your season are now gone, and there has to be all new structure put into your soil, and that takes time. Um, and so that's why you'll see, recently tilled fields, they dry up really fast. And so you might have
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
field 2 feet deep. You know, if especially on our field, if we do that and we don't put anything into the field for a week, we now have a rocky hard pan that's 2 feet deep,
Wow.
and getting that moisture holding capacity back up, it takes a lot of water to do it.
Wow. Okay, yeah, that's just something I didn't because I farmed originally in Texas where we were more clay soils, and then trying to farm out here in Oregon now where it is sandy soil. It is a very different way of thinking about your soil, and it is, I've learned it's really important to keep your soil covered in whatever way, either in mulch. I tend to use a lot of old hay or straw,
Mhm.
um, and then try to do a cover crop um, the rest of the time. And then what I've been doing is just like, because I do mustard in my some of my tunnels, and then I just let that grow, and it kind of dies back with the winter kill, and I just leave that on the surface. I don't really try to chop it down, and I don't till in the roots or anything. I just leave the roots in there. I'm assuming that's probably the microbes are going to continue to feed on those for a while after as it
Yeah,
decomposes.
exactly.
And
Yep.
is that the way to do the? Okay.
Microbes. There's also springtails, which are a small insect that you might see. They'll kind of jump around in the soil, worms, all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing when I pull back some of my mulch, especially in my tunnels, just the number of worms that are in there. They're feeding right on that upper level underneath the mulch, and they love that straw and the old hay.
Uh-huh.
And just it's worm city in there. I just found, I think these are, I had a whole bunch of little larvae in my tunnel as I was kind of trying to prepare it for planting. And when I did the Google image search, it looked like it was the black soldier fly larva, which I think is very beneficial to breaking down, I guess, organic matter. I've never had those that I've seen in the soil, but there were quite a few of them in there. So that was kind of exciting that
Yeah.
they just somehow
Yeah.
showed up on their own. I didn't even have to invite them.
Yeah. As much as we can do to increase the diversity of all the things acting in the soil, it plays a huge benefit for us. Yeah.
Okay, and it's a good habit to get into anyway, because I think our soil health is our farm wealth basically. So okay, so then one of the questions is how can farmers ensure that they are that you have the right balance of things in your soil without over fertilizing? Because a lot of times we're just throwing fertilizer, like Fertilizer Friday. A lot of flower farmers, that's kind of our thing, as we go and do our fish emulsion or kelp or whatever. And I am guilty of doing that last year with one of the, I think it was called More Bloom. It's one of the, I think it's an organic one, and it was to try to encourage some of my things to bloom quicker and better and stronger and whatever. So I was just doing that every Friday. But then when my soil test came back, luckily James was able to look at my soil test. That was the first time I met you, I think, because I made you
Yeah.
look at my soil test. So,
Yeah.
and I was already super high in some things, and I immediately stopped doing all that Fertilizer Friday stuff. So I think obviously soil testing is important, but what are some other things that farmers can really think about so that we're not just over fertilizing for the sake of fertilizing? And um, or are there things like fish emulsion? Is that something that is fairly innocuous to just do that every week, just to kind of keep the fertilizing program going, or is that even necessary? I mean, I know it's independent. I mean, or dependent on each individual situation, but just overall, what do you think about over fertilizing?
I think it is a for sure huge problem in ag, because you're right. Like we just have it in our heads that more fertilizer is better, and that's
Yeah,
oftentimes not the case. There's plenty of
yeah.
nutrients that they interact with one another, and they can either be antagonistic or a stimulant.
Mm,
And so if you're really high in one, it may reduce the uptake of another, or it might increase the need for another. And so something for everybody to get really familiar with is the Mulder's chart. And it will give you a breakdown roughly of the nutrient interactions that are occurring within a plant and how it affects the uptake. And so as I remember, you had really high organic matter, which is great.
Yep.
But then I want to say you were pretty high in phosphorus, and I could
Yep.
be
It
wrong.
was extremely high, ridiculously high. And I think probably that's probably the higher nutrient that's in more bloom to try to get the flowers going. And yeah.
Exactly. Yep. And so phosphorus is antagonistic to potassium, and potassium
Mm.
is the key nutrient for root uptake of nutrients and flow of nutrients throughout the plant. And so if you have really high phosphorus, it's reducing your plant's availability to uptake that potassium. And so
Mm.
basically you have all that phosphorus that's now just sitting in your soil and it's not available to the plant at all. Uh,
Okay.
and that also ties into, calcium as well. It ties into iron.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just looking at my chart. I don't know this by top of my head,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, and then from there, if you're not able to uptake potassium, now it's reducing your uptake of nitrogen. And so
Mm.
it kind of just creates a snowball effect, and to the point where you have all these nutrients in your soil, but they're no longer available to your plant. And then you're just adding more and more and more and basically wasting money.
Yeah. Guilty as charged.
And at the end of the
I'm going to
day,
put a,
money is all I pay.
yeah,
So,
exactly. I'll put a link to this chart. It's actually really interesting. I didn't even know about this chart. And I think I told you I was an archaeologist, didn't I? For like 20 plus years, I was an archaeologist. So I'm like a total soil nerd anyway. And I didn't know about this chart. I pulled out my Munsell soil chart. Do you know what this is?
I haven't seen that. No.
This is what we used in archaeology. So we used to have to, when we were doing our description of whatever soil we were working in, we had to go through these charts and find exactly the color of the soil. So yeah, this has had a lot of years in the field. I was a field archaeologist for 25 years or so. So I come by my love of dirt pretty honestly, I'd say. But that chart is really interesting because I didn't know that because my phosphorus was so high and I just kept feeding it. And I mean, I'm guessing that because I did end up having issues with some, I think, calcium related stem topple in some of my ranunculus. And so now that I'm understanding, oh my, I was probably, even though I would go back and try to add calcium to try to fix that, my phosphorus, I guess, was just so high that I'm just really wasting my time with trying to fix that. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was
And
good
unfortunately,
information.
there's never a quick fix to nutrient imbalances.
Hmm.
If
Yeah.
it's not available in your soil, the best thing you can do is a foliar application, because as long
Okay.
as your potassium levels are okay and your stomata in the plant is opening, it can absorb those nutrients through the stomata. But
Ah,
it's a hard game to play for sure.
yeah. Yeah. I need you to be my full-time agronomist on my farm and keep me from making all these costly mistakes because, fertilizers and inputs are not cheap. So, um, okay, so that was really good information. So then one of the other questions, which we kind of have touched on just a little bit here, but what are some natural and organic ways to improve nutrient cycling in the soil? Is there anything you can think of that comes to mind on how we can deal with that?
Yeah. So again, soil testing,
Hmm.
finding out what is your pH and what is your CEC.
Okay.
Really knowing of that CEC, what is being occupied. So what are the different percentages of occupation within that? And typically, the four that you're looking for is the potassium, the calcium, magnesium, and sodium. And
Okay.
so balancing your exchange capacity is absolutely crucial to then the rest of the nutrient flow throughout the soil.
Okay.
Typically 4 to 6% potassium, um, a little bit less than that for the sodium. Magnesium is about 10 to 15%, and then calcium greater than 70. Almost
Okay.
every soil test I have seen here in Central Oregon, at least, is very low in calcium and very high in magnesium, and also very high in potassium. At least our fields are very high in potassium, particularly because we add manure after year.
Okay.
Depending on what your pH is, you have a couple of different options for adding calcium to the soil. If you need to raise your pH, given that it's too acidic, and ideal being about 6.5. If you're too acidic, you can add lime. If you're at 6.5 to 6.8 on your pH, but you're low in calcium, then gypsum is the next best option. And so essentially what you're doing is adding calcium sulfate to the soil. That calcium and sulfate is now leaching out either magnesium or potassium from your soil and freeing up exchange capacity for those nutrients to then bind to.
Okay.
And that is where I start, at least when figuring out how I can increase the nutrient holding capacity, or at least increase the ideal ratios of what's there. And so, from there, nitrogen is always mobile. It doesn't really matter what you do. It's going to leach. And that's a huge reason that you want to have a cover crop in the field. You're almost always okay to add nitrogen. You just don't always have to. Phosphorus, on the other hand, is not mobile in the soil, and there's not really a good way of getting it out other than crop removal from the plant itself, and then subsequently probably removing that debris from the field, because if you leave that debris, any phosphorus that was tied up in the plant is then being leached back into the soil.
Okay. Wow. So you kind of have to be a chemist as well and try to understand how all of these things interact.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah. I thought so he was putting seed in the dirt and water,
Exactly. Now all this science has to come into play. I don't think I did so well in chemistry in school, actually. So maybe I should go back and maybe revisit some of those classes. Okay, so then now let's sort of shift and talk about maybe some long-term success in how soil health, maybe as you're building it, how that impacts maybe like diseases and pests and all of those things within your crops.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, the stronger the plant, the more resistant to disease it's going to be. And so if you have a weak plant, it's just more susceptible to that disease, whether it's fusarium or rhizoctonia or any of the other thousands of diseases that are affecting our soil diseases. It's not terribly common, at least so far with my experience here. The valley definitely struggles heavily with fusarium. And honestly, there's nothing really to do about it other than growing fusarium resistant crops. So it takes 20 plus years of a field being fallow for that fusarium bacteria or colony to really decrease. And we can't afford to do 20 years of not anything that we can harvest.
Right.
So being really intentional about what you're planting in the field and being really intentional with monitoring your plant health will go a long way. There's also small things that you can do, particularly if you're a smaller scale farmer, and just, at least as far as bugs go, any sacrificial plants, introducing any biological controls. So, for us, in our greenhouses, at least, we struggle with thrips a lot. And so we've introduced predatory mites into the greenhouse during a period that we're not able to spray any insecticides. And so, for that, they've, definitely worked very well. It's not something that builds over time. It's more of a Band-Aid, or at least something to do to tie you over until that bloom period is done. and you're able to get back in there and spray whatever you need to spray. Granted, sprays are expensive too. Even,
Yeah.
spinach, pyrethrin, they're all expensive. And so
Right.
doing whatever we can, diversity wise, encouraging biologicals, encouraging any natural predators is very important. And that's kind of the whole regenerative ag movement in the first place is
Yeah.
letting nature work for you. And so
Right.
whatever we can do to encourage that is, yeah, very important.
That's something that I've been sort of researching a little bit over the last few years is um, like the Brix level in plants and the sugars, and that's something I really need to dive into a little bit deeper because it's very complicated, and
It is.
I know there's something to keeping the Brix level at a certain number that the pests can't, is it that they can't really see the plant anymore, or they, because I know they're obviously pests are attracted to weak plants, and so I guess if you're keeping the sugars up in your plants, is that's what's keeping them healthy and less, I mean, okay.
Yeah, exactly that. So I mean, essentially your crop is constantly exchanging carbohydrates with the soil. So uh, any microbes
Okay.
in the soil, they're typically colonizing around your roots in the plant. Your plant is going to exchange carbohydrates for nutrients. So carbohydrates feed the microbes then eat organic matter and release nitrogen, and that is then uptaken by the plant. So it's just this
Okay.
symbiotic relationship between the microbes and the plant itself. And by keeping your Brix level up, your sugar level up, whether it's in the soil or in the plant, is really just feeding those microbes so they stay active uh, and are able to do
Okay.
their job.
Okay, so that's what you want really, is to feed your microbes so that they do all the heavy lifting, I guess, basically of keeping your plant healthy, and then in turn your soil healthy. I guess
Yeah,
if they're
exactly.
in conjunction together, then the pest can't really get a hold on it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, so we talked about this just a little bit earlier with over fertilizing, but um, can you tell me maybe some other big mistakes that farmers make when they're managing their soil? Over fertilizing, I guess, is a really big one, but are there other things that we do maybe inadvertently that impact our soil?
Overwatering. That is a huge
Oh,
one that I see, particularly here in Powder with all
oh,
the hay fields. It's predominantly
mm-hmm.
flood irrigation. And
Okay,
by overwatering, you are reducing the available oxygen in the soil, which also then inhibits your microbe activity. So you're
okay,
creating uh, basically anaerobic zones where there's no longer oxygen available,
mm,
and now your plant is no longer able to get oxygen to its root zone, and
okay,
yeah, exactly, killing off any microbes that could be active. They're now all dead. That's the big one I see. I do think it's getting more awareness around it, at least. There's a lot of
mm,
pushes just in the sense of conservationism, but also farmers are seeing, I don't need to put 12 hours of water down. I maybe need to do 3 hours more consistently. Um, you know, you do get a lot of evaporation. So another thing I will do with my soil probe is just going out into the field pretty regularly and seeing how far down is that water penetrating and making sure that at my root zone it's staying moist but not oversaturated. And so there's it's not a very scientific way of analyzing it, but you
yeah,
can, take a core sample, pull it out and squeeze it, and it shouldn't leach water out. That soil should be able to hold on to the water, given that you're squeezing it. If it's starting to leach out, you're probably overwatering. And
okay,
and so what to do to mitigate that, just take a couple of days, keep analyzing your soil, keep watching it, and once it starts to dry out, then you can hit it again with water. But that is
okay.
for sure one thing that I see more than anything else is too much water.
Oh, yeah, I guess people are killing them with kindness because people, I guess, think, oh, let me just give them all of this water and they'll be happy. And, not all plants really appreciate that too. But I guess now, obviously, your soil doesn't appreciate it.
Hmm.
Um, Something that I've been experimenting with, and I don't know if I've talked to you about this or not, is called pulse watering, where it's instead of the, my thought for many, many years was that you watered less frequently and deeper, longer, or whatever to really penetrate into the soil. And then, so a few years ago, I heard about this pulse watering concept where you're actually just doing like maybe 5 minutes at a time, multiple times a day, every day, just to keep that upper level kind of moist, to keep your microbes and all the bacteria and stuff happy in there. Because if you let that all dry out and just become crusty, and then water, 4 days later, really deep or whatever, then you're kind of impacting your microbes regularly. And if you keep it consistently moist, then they're happy and they're multiplying and they're doing their thing. What is, I don't think we've talked about this before, but
We
what are your
haven't.
thoughts on pulse watering?
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely true. And there's plenty of
Okay.
plants out there that they don't want quote unquote wet feet,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
having it be you know wet but not oversaturated to the point that
Yeah.
there's no longer oxygen getting their stomatids are closing, the
Mhm.
plant is essentially shutting down and going into a
Mhm.
period of survival to try to get out of that phase. There's truth to the depth of water. It does
Okay.
encourage roots to tap down deeper. Um, but to your point, if you water really heavy and let it dry out, that soil is expanding and then it's contracting. And so now it's
Mhm.
as it contracts, depending on your soil type, especially and particularly with clay, as it contracts, it
Yeah.
gets really hard, and you're
Yeah.
again just reducing that oxygen availability into the
Yeah.
soil.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so, yeah,
Well, it seems like there's,
pulse watering is a great way to go. It's not always feasible, depending on your scale as
yeah,
well. For us, we
true.
do typically 24-hour sets with our drip irrigation, and they get it once a week, but that's just because that's the only way we can get through all of our acres. Otherwise, you have
Yeah.
somebody out there every 6 hours and nobody wants to be up at 1 in the morning changing water kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, true. That's a good point with scale, because it's easier for me. I have less than a half acre that I irrigate, and I do use drip tape, so it's just a little bit coming out. Although I have experimented with doing some of the overhead, just some of the fan watering in the summer, just to kind of you know, cover everything that my drip tape is not covering, just to sort of cool the soil down, keep it a little bit moist. Because I'm assuming that the microbes are not super happy if your soil gets really hot either. If you're just baking in, 100+ degree heat for days on end, I'm guessing that probably impacts the microbes as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And, you know, sugar and oxygen are the two things that they need to survive. And so if it's
Okay.
drying out and there's no oxygen available, yeah, they're not able to survive.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so then, as we sort of wrap up a little bit, if a farmer could do just one thing today, that would help their soil health, maybe long term, what would you recommend that they do? I know they should get a soil test. That's probably the first thing. But what else would you recommend that somebody do?
Um, I mean, I think the main thing is just keeping your ground covered at all times. So whether that's mulching or
Okay.
cover cropping, that would be my
Mm-hmm.
my big recommendation. If everybody got into the habit of never leaving their ground bare, that would go a really long
Mm-hmm.
way. Not only in carbon sequestration, but yeah, in that long term soil health.
Okay. Good advice. Okay, and then I did have one bonus question that I'm going to throw in here. This is from one of our farmers, and she's trying to build soil. So, for those of you who may not be in the Central Oregon area, we don't really have soil here. We really just have sort of sandy ash. We really don't have anything to start with. We have to make all of our soil from scratch. So, what she's doing is she's adding leaves, old manure, dried molasses, and she's trying to help build her soil from there. So her question was sort of trying to understand the difference between carbons and sugars, and like you kind of touched on that with the carbohydrates and the oxygen, kind of what they need to help build the soil. So is she doing the right thing by adding all of these things into to help build her soil?
Yeah, I think so for sure. And so, by adding manure, you're adding nitrogen, you're adding phosphorus, you're adding potassium as the main things, but you're getting plenty of other micronutrients as well. The leaves, especially dried leaves, strictly carbon. That's really all you're doing at that point. But to that
Okay.
degree, that is what the microbes are feeding on is the carbon. And so
Okay.
it is really important to recognize what your carbon to nitrogen ratio is in the soil. If you have too much carbon and not enough nitrogen, those microbes are now going to start needing that nitrogen to keep feeding, and it's taking away from what's available to your plant. And so if you have a really carbon heavy soil, you're no longer it's just tying up that nitrogen and making it unavailable. And same thing for the sugar. You're feeding both the plant and the microbes, but really the microbes that are then exchanging nutrients with the plant. I have a book from the American Society of Agronomy. It's just it was a test prep book, but it goes really into depth on soil characteristics and nutrient management, and I highly recommend it. It's not very expensive. Paperback book available on either the Certified Crop Advisor website or the American Society of Agronomy website. You can buy just the regional or the international. They're basically the same information in both, and that's definitely where I've gotten the most of my knowledge from. There's other books out there, but it felt like a very good basic rundown on everything that you should know.
Okay. Oh, that would be very helpful. I'll get all those information pieces from you and links and everything, and I'll make sure those are in the show notes for anybody who wants to dig a little bit deeper into soil health. So, well, this has been absolutely amazing. I feel like I hit the jackpot when I met you, because I always have questions about my soil. And as I kind of get more into things like Korean natural farming and things like that, where I don't know that I ever really fully understood how critical soil health really is. I mean, it's everything. You're never going to have productive plants if you don't really pay attention to your soil and really get it healthy. So I'm really happy to have you sort of in the orbit. Poor James answers all my questions whenever I have something that I can't find information on. So
I
thank you so
appreciate that.
much, James.
It's been super fun. It's definitely been great getting to know you, and I'm really excited, for Lazarus and the Flower Collective to have some of these projects moving forward.
Yeah.
It'd be good.
Yep, and I think we might need to do another soil episode in the future too, because I know there's always a lot of questions on soil, and I'm a dirt nerd, so I could talk about soil all day too. So.
Yep, likewise. My hands are always dirty for a reason.
Me too. I think they call it the farmer's manicure.
Yeah.
All right, James. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I appreciate it.
Okay, we'll see you soon.
All right.